All right, welcome back after the break, and let's get started with embracing expanded DataCite schema support for IGSNs, instruments, publishers, and funder PIDs. So we have three of us that are kind of coordinating the session. Myself, Raina Jenkins from the World Data System, Nick Darbo, who's online from EarthRef, and Natalie Rea is also in the room here. And so the three of us are kind of coordinating the session together. And I'll just, how come the advancing is not working? Oh, I have to use this. Nope, how do I advance the slides? I tried that. Oh, it happened. Oh, what did you do?
It'll just be a left click.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just pass the audio to Nick just to introduce the cluster. So Nick, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today. This is a Council of Data Facilities sponsored session. The CDF was first organized under the EarthCube project. A large number of data facilities joined together and dealt with issues and consulted with various people at the NSF about things that the council data facilities were up against. And after that 10-year EarthCube project, we decided that it was a worthwhile group of people to continue forward, and we transitioned over to an ESIP cluster. So we are now here in ESIP, and we meet on the third Wednesday of each month, and we usually have a presentation on a current topic and in-depth discussions. So come and join us if you're interested in that.
Great. Just go for a few logistics for today's session. So if you could join the collaborative notes and just sign in with your name and affiliation, feel free to add notes there too. We have session facilitators that I mentioned already, but also in the room we have Cameron Ryland, who's helping us, going to be with the roaming mic whenever we have questions, so that those online participants can also hear. And Daniela is monitoring for the online questions to elevate them to the room as they come in. So the five of us are working together on this session. Just to remind you of the ESIP community participation guidelines, that the session is being recorded and will be archived. And if any virtual attendees can just stay muted if you're not speaking. And then in terms of questions, in the room we will have a roving mic, so we need to use the mic just so the online participants can hear. But then anyone online, just throw a question into the Q&A, and either Nick or Daniela will take care of that. So in terms of what we're talking about today, we're going to do a little bit of an overview of why are persistent identifiers so important. Nick will do a little bit of intro into the DataCite schema enhancements that have come out with version 4.5. Natalie will tell us a little bit about IGSN developments, and I'll cover a little of the PIDs for instruments, RORs, RAIDs, and then we'll have some time for discussion to look at implementation of some of these newer developments, and then a brief closing. So why are PIDs so important? So first of all, what are PIDs? So this definition is a fairly good one. A persistent identifier is a digital identifier that is globally unique, persistent, machine resolvable, and has associated metadata. That associated metadata is incredibly important, and I will also say that the connection metadata between persistent identifiers is one of the most highly valuable parts of that. And PIDs are essential if we're ever going to be truly FAIR compliant with the FAIR principles. So I've pulled out just some of the aspects of FAIR where the persistent identifiers are crucial, but there's many aspects of FAIR where the persistent identifiers help facilitate parts of it, like the license metadata and whatnot. So PIDs are essential here. And then we see over the last few years, proliferation of national PID strategies. There was a RDA National PID Strategies Interest Group, it's still running, but they put out a report back in 2023 that looked at 9 case studies from around the world And now the US is working on a national PID strategy. There was a really great presentation at PIDFest, so I'll give you the link to that about how that's progressing. And then there's also a nice blog post in the Scholarly Kitchen about why are these so important. So these are some references to have a look, and you'll have access to these slides with all the links later. So another reason that is important is if you're a data repository and wanting to get certified with the Core Trust Seal, it's part of the requirements in discovery and identification. So this is making sure that the digital objects are associated with persistent identifiers and with proper citation. So that's an important piece. And then what I was getting at with the relationships in the metadata for those PID interconnections, that's vital for the traceability and metrics that we can glean out of the research data ecosystem. And so the diagram up at the upper right is a nice one that comes from DataCite, where they highlight some of the relationships that they offer in their metadata. So to the journal papers or to the organizations and the researchers. And the organizations show up in different ways, both affiliated to the organizations, but also the publishers and the funders. And then the data citation corpus,
They can't see your face, so maybe.
oh, they can't see my face while my video is on, so I'm not sure what's going on.
I mean, they can just see your next.
Yeah, I don't know why that is, so how do I fix that?
Can you just click or, oh, you can.
Okay, well, I'll go like this.
Okay.
Well, I'll have to, yeah, okay, anyways. So the data citation corpus has done some great work in starting to develop use cases and find out ways to display information, leveraging all these relationships between the persistent identifiers. So if you look at the citation corpus dashboard that came out in April, they have some 6 different types of graphs showing, and you can redisplay them in different ways with filters and making different selection choices and different display types. So, but they've got these 6 types of dashboards there, and that was just the first release, so we can expect a lot more and leveraging what is available in these metadata. So I think this is one of the really exciting developments that's happening with persistent identifiers. Another thing that persistent identifiers really help towards is some of these research assessment reforms. This report came out of the International Science Council last year about the future of research evaluation. And then this last November, we had the new statement coming out about the 12 best practices for sharing research data. And I've highlighted a few of the 3 of the 12 that specifically mention persistent identifiers and data citations and these kinds of relationships and interconnections being so important. And this is important, I think, for the future of research assessment so that we can start to elevate the value of other kinds of research objects beyond traditional journal articles, but also demonstrate the utility of these different objects by their downstream uses and whatnot. So this PID graph and the relationships between these persistent identifiers become really a new tool for evaluating the utility of research outputs. And we actually had a webinar at the World Data System last month about this research statement because we endorsed it. And so if you would like to have a look at that recording, that's available online. Now we can also tell that persistent identifiers are really important globally when we look at things like PIDFest. That had over 175 people in person and 100 online with many talks on different aspects of persistent identifiers. So those presentations are all nicely online with persistent identifiers and landing pages and metadata, as you would expect. And so you can have a look there. And then also, there was a nice summary article about it, again, in that Scholarly Kitchen. So that's also worth having a read of some of the highlights. And we know that PIDapalooza was sort of a precursor to this sort of event. And so it's nice to see PIDFest come around. And we expect it, I think, in 3 years' time or something like that. So I'm really looking forward to having the next one roll around. Also, a little pitch, July 31st is a deadline for the submissions to AGU, and myself and Aaron Robinson and John Chidaki are co-chairing a session around persistent identifier usage. So if you are doing work in that realm, please have a look and submit a session or a talk or an abstract. Hopefully we'll get presentations or at least posters. So please have a look at that if that's something that you're working on. So at this point, I'll pass it to Nick, who will talk us through a little bit of the DataCite schema updates.
Thanks. Yeah, today I'm going to talk about the DataCite Schema 4.5 updates. I'm Nick Jarbo, and I'm from EarthRef, and I work with the Magic Paleomagnetic repositories and the Fiesta software systems. Next slide. Guys are all probably pretty familiar with DataCite, but it's a nonprofit that provides DOIs for research data, so data sets, and also other research outputs. You can join DataCite as a group. You can get a license to assign DOIs to research outputs, and you get your own DOI suffix. Or, many universities, most universities and institutions will already be a member, and you can work through them to create DOIs for your research output for free or a small fee. Next slide. So DataCite updated their metadata schema to in February of this year. The schema now supports instruments and report pre-registrations, and also support for publisher identifiers. And so I'm going to go through each of these and just give a little more detail. Next slide. So for instruments, an instrument for this research type is a tool or device, something that's a physical object that's doing measurements. So this isn't for digital descriptions or digital designs of the instrument. It's for the physical instrument itself. And so this is how you would do put that in your XML. You have a resource type labeled instrument, and then you just have the name of the instrument. Next slide. Another addition is pre-registration reports. So I'm sure you've all been aware that there's been this sort of rise in awareness of a replication crisis in many studies where large data sets are collected and then certain conclusions are made from the data, but it's more a factor of large data set searching and key hacking. So now people doing studies, it's much better statistically and methodology to have your report what you're going to study ahead of time. And so this is one way that you can reference these and these pre-registration reports. So DataCite's added that. That's great. Next slide. Whoops, back. The third one is publisher identifiers. Glad they finally added these. They've been needed for a while. Obviously now many of you here are data repositories or other people that are producing these DOIs, and so you're the publisher in this case. You want to label yourself and have people be able to find you through the webs or other search mechanisms. So this publisher identifier has been set up. You describe your language. You put in the publisher identifier, so that would be yourself. Those can be a ROR or another DOI or Wikidata, etc. And then you point to the schema, the URI for that organization that is identifying you, and then you have your name there. So if you're a publisher of data or using DataCite, publishing of other scientific outputs, give credit for the people that are doing that. Next slide, please. So once you've published a DOI or you want to look at one of these data DOIs, here's a link where you can display all of the metadata from a data DOI by putting in the DOI in this URL. And so that can be useful if you're trying to, create your own and get examples from other works, or if you want to just test out and see what yours are looking like. Next slide. So DataCite has a very extensive online data resources to help you in all the various areas where they support the community. So there's REST API information, metadata information, how to do integrations, best practices, IGSNs, data management plans, RAIDs, etc. There's a large number of online help and also links to people that can help you. So next slide, please. So here's sort of a list of a variety of things that DataCite can help you with. And this is sort of how you get your PIDs and all the connections of your data up in the cloud for people can use. And the more the metadata you have on your objects, the better connections people can make. So that's sort of an overview of DataCite and the new parameters that they've added. Thank you. Next will be Natalie, and she's going to talk about IGSNs.
Perfect. Thank you so much to those attending online and here in person. My name is Natalie Ray. I'm a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Arizona in the College of Information Sciences. In this role, I also support community engagement and user research experience for the System for Earth and Extraterrestrial Sample Registration. And I'm here today in person to present in lieu of Project Director Kirsten Leonard, who is based out of Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. And we're excited today to share some updates about what CSAR is doing to support sample repositories, individual users, and all kinds of sample collectors in between with minting IGSNs and registering these with DataCite. Just by a show of hands in the room, how many people are familiar with CSAR? Okay, a few, maybe about half. So CSAR is a community platform, like I was saying, that facilitates discovery, access, and reuse of samples by making the metadata persistently accessible and, importantly, online for both humans and machines to read. And this is facilitated through the use of persistent identifiers, in this case, IGSN IDs. We have to date over 5 million samples registered in the CSAR catalog, and this extends broadly beyond rocks, but also includes fluids, gases, biological materials, synthetic experimental materials. We have more than 1,600 users worldwide, and this ranges from individual PIs or researchers to entire museum collections and managed collections, sample and core repositories, and so on. And so we're really proud that we have a global user community. You can see the distribution on the map here. And we're also recommended by funders and publishers. CSAR offers a range of services, including a workspace for sample collectors and curators to submit and manage sample metadata. Of course, we register samples with DataCite to obtain IGSNs, which is what we're focusing on today. We also offer user support, including, importantly, curatorial review of metadata. So we're really focused on making sure that we have rich metadata to enable reuse and discovery of these samples. And then a publicly accessible sample catalog for discovery. We're also really proud that CSAR is celebrating 20 years this year. This is an extraordinary accomplishment. And CSAR was started in 2004 as part of an NSF small grant for exploratory research that was developed to make the prototype of IGSN and the CSAR system. It has been fully operational since 2009. IGSNs started out as international geo-sample numbers, and they've now expanded to international generic sample numbers as the scope has broadened. Again, we are a system for users big and small, and so on the screen here, we're showing some of the managed collections globally that we have, and we're also highlighting some collections that are in progress. So these are collections that are coming online and increasingly adopting IGSNs through CSAR. And so today we're here to talk a little bit more specifically about the recent changes to the IGSN with the shift to DataCite DOIs. So up until 2022, IGSNs consisted of a 9-character alphanumeric code. So we're showing an example here, i.e. A, M, N, so on. These identifiers had uniqueness in the suffix. So there's a user code at the beginning. Here it's AMN, and they had uniqueness in that AMN 007P. All IGSN allocating agents worldwide were using the same handle prefix, and they resolved to handle.net. And so when users are citing a sample, they could omit that prefix because we had this uniqueness. With the shift to DataCite since 2003, IGSNs are now DOIs, and so each IGSN allocating agent, of which CSAR is one, has a unique DOI prefix associated with them. And so subsequently, the rest of that code, the suffix, may not be unique. And this is a challenge and a problem for multi-user systems like CSAR. The IGSNs will resolve to this DOI, and importantly, also any pre-DataCite IGSN also has a related DOI, and this was quite a lot of effort to get working. And so now when you're citing samples, the prefix, that DOI prefix, must be included to make this resolve. And so, to delve a little bit more into what CSAR did to implement the new IGSN with DataCite, we mapped the sample metadata to the mandatory DataCite metadata as defined by the IGSN 2040 metadata working group. And what I want to emphasize here is that I'm going to show on the next slide that mapping. Those are the mandatory kind of minimum DataCite metadata, but CSAR really enhances the rest of that by having all this community-defined metadata template that really ensures that we're making these samples fair by having minimum metadata and metadata that's useful for the actual users. Like I said, all pre-DataCite IGSNs were registered with DataCite, and this happened by April 2023, and they have a DOI counterpart. And then one way that we're supporting some of our larger users is that users can request to set up their own repository and then receive their own DOI prefix. So they don't have to use the CSAR one if they would like to have their own prefix associated with their IEDA2 account. And IEDA is the Interdisciplinary Earth Data Alliance. It's a larger umbrella that CSAR currently falls under. And so here's the direct mapping to the DataCite metadata schema with the CSAR metadata fields on the left and then DataCite metadata fields on the right. And this mapping has been executed since 2023. And so this slide is important. The landscape is shifting right now with respect to IGSNs and other minting agents for IGSNs are coming online, such as the USGS and data repositories. And so this poses opportunities for increased sample PID uptake by the community, but it also provides challenges related to improper procedures and applications, particularly in the case of data repositories minting IGSNs, where there's a higher risk of generating duplicate IGSNs for samples that have already been registered before. We can talk more about that in the breakouts if people are interested. And so from the CSAR perspective, the best way to make samples fair, by which we mean, in this case, making samples discoverable, linkable with their associated research products, meaning publications, data sets, other research products, and with rich metadata that makes these records actually usable. With the current infrastructure, we would say using a dedicated sample PID minting service is the way to go, and then asking your data repositories to develop metadata fields that support those PIDs, in this case, IGSNs. And then I'll just wrap up to share some new developments ongoing at CSAR. CSAR is in the process of becoming a DataCite service provider, and so this will allow organizations who are already DataCite members who maybe have a lot of samples to register, big collections greater than 10,000 samples. This will allow them to register for IGSNs with CSAR. We're also expanding services for institutions, repositories, and large collaboratory projects, and we're doing this by expanding functionality with group accounts, again, enabling users, if they so choose, to have their own dedicated DOI prefix, and then building customized landing pages with organizational branding for those large organizations or collections. Planning is also underway for IEDA2 to become a DataCite consortium lead, and this would support those organizations who may not yet be DataCite members, and it would significantly reduce the costs associated that DataCite charges. Again, we focus on sample and data discovery, and so we really want to make sure that the samples and their products, that data is linked. And so the IEDA2 sample nexus is in development to facilitate this linking, connecting samples, data, people, organizations through PID metadata. We're also actively integrating with the iSample Central Discovery Platform, which is a novel platform coming online that's designed to be interdisciplinary. And then we're focusing in the coming year or two on better supporting individual communities. And so there's a new grant that'll be starting up here in a couple months with new NSF funding. And this work is really designed to support communities in making more customized metadata templates, developing sample best practices that are unique to disciplines' needs and workflows. And then we're developing revised guidance and policies for sample access and curation. And this is work that's also coming out of the Sampling Nature Research Coordination Network. And so I'm sure we'll have plenty to discuss, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, and I'm going to continue a little bit on with some other persistent identifier updates that we thought would be relevant for this community. So to start on the instrument side, we saw with Nick's talk about the DataCite updates that instruments are now included, and I just wanted to give credit to the earlier work that led to that. So there was an RDA working group for persistent, for persistent identifiers of PIDs working group, and they put out in 2021 a schema, proposed schema for how this would look, and that is one of the precursors that led to that DataCite integration. And so they also have an ongoing white paper that they still are modifying online with ongoing developments as their group realizes or has new suggestions for guidance. So that's another place you can go for more information. And then, as we saw, that is introduced into the schema version 4.5. But in addition to being a resource type general, it also allows for more relationships. So there's a relationship is collected by and collects. So you can associate the instrument DOI to the data set DOI or to any kind of publications. Well, the collects and collects collected by is more for the data. But they have a whole great guidance there, as Nick was alluding to. And there's work going on in different places, so just to highlight a few examples to integrate and implement this work. So in Australia, they have put out their own best practice guides for PIDs for instruments that you can have a look at what they're advocating there. It's also been integrated already to some research platforms like RSpace, where researchers can already allocate instrument persistent identifiers from DataCite through that research platform, and they have a webinar all about that came out last fall. So that link is there too. And all these slides will be available, and I think are already available for you to be able to click on these links later. And another ongoing work is a project led by researchers, some of them at UNCAR, for Fair Facilities and Instruments Research Coordination Network. Now, we had invited actually them to attend this event, but unfortunately the timing didn't work. But we're trying to set up a session through our cluster for them to present about this work. And they'll be having a workshop late August, a month from now, to dive deeper into this. And so looking forward to their future outputs. But there's also many outputs already on that website that they've already produced. Oops, wrong button. And then in terms of ROAR updates, there's a few that I worked on with Amanda French. She's the ROAR Technical Community Manager. Unfortunately, even though she lives in North Carolina, she wasn't able to be with us today. But she did participate in the development of these slides. And she's actually standing by through social media. So if you have specific questions about ROAR, you can reach her at all these different social media platforms that she's monitoring. And she's also following along with the ESIP event hashtag. So you can reach out to her that way, or you can, I'll have her email address at the end that you can also ask her specific questions. But if you haven't been familiar with ROAR's Research Organization Registry, this is just an example of a record. So it has a landing page with relationships, with the website, with name, location, and there's over 100,000 ROARs worldwide already. So it's been well adopted since in that time. And it's been applied in many circumstances. So here's just a few, but well, we already saw the relationships in the DataCite metadata. There's also Crossref and ORCID, our major identifier systems that have built that in. But also knowledge graph systems, repositories, and publishing systems, and so many more. And every month they have a community call and they announce more major adopters. So they have a really good following. And then this metadata, or sorry, this report just came out, I guess, a couple of days ago from the DataCite community call about how ROAR IDs have been used in the DataCite records. So you can see quite a few appearances of that affiliation or with ROARs, and then also funders as the ROAR type is also having an uptake, and the publishers is already having an uptake, even though that's a new affiliation. So it's really great to see these numbers continually rising, more usage of the identifiers with the organizations. And the repositories is how many repositories have submitted records that have that information. And then just by the numbers, you can kind of see the increase over time with the ROAR usage. So it's really rising over time. And that's from the DataCite metadata as well. And then this also is a relationship with DataCite and ROAR, but here you can see that most organization references to IDs are with ROAR, and in two different kind of ways. So ROAR is a really great identifier to adopt if you're choosing what to do for organizations. The schema updates that they had just recently, version 2.0, both for the schema and for the API, there's all the sorts of resources you can find more about what they've done. But I'm going to highlight a few things in the next few slides. So for one, they made some updates so that they have some more provenance traceability of when records were created and changed. So the date a new ROAR was established will be there now, and when it was modified. So that's a little bit better. Not just for provenance, but also for if you're a service provider and you're wanting to update, find out what new ROARs are available, you can query based on the last modified date or when a record was created since your last polling to the system. So you're not having to query and grab everything. You can just query what's changed since you last did any kind of update to your platform. And then before, you could only have one location affiliated with a ROR entry, and now you can have multiple. So if your organization has more than one legitimate site for the same organization, then you can now make those changes. And a new major change that I'm really excited about is that they introduced the funder type with organizations, and they've ingested all of the records from, that's actually, I'm jumping ahead to the next slide, but they've ingested all the records from the Open Funder Registry, and, oh, this is going back, how do I back? And so this is going to be the new way that it would be advised to associate funders, is using the RORs and with this that have this funder type affiliation. And you can do a query to see what are all the organizations that have that funder type with this new feature. And there's this blog post that you can read about that explains this transition from using the Open Funder Registry. Now, in the early uptake, it's been data repositories who might not have actually had funder affiliations represented. And so they're seeing that uptake already. And there's going to be another blog post very soon about some of the adoption to that funder metadata, so that you watch that in the coming weeks. But as well, there's a lot more details about this change upcoming. Now, the old Open Funder Registry information will continue to be resolvable because they are persistent identifiers, but curation at some point will stop as the full transition happens. So they want to make it stable, at least for the near term, so that services that are dependent on that registry are still working, but over time, the shift is going to be towards the RORs being the centralized place for where you should be associating your funder metadata. So if you are using the Open Funder Registry, you might want to note that so you make the switch to RORs. And then already we can see in DataCite that the funders are a lot of attributions to RORs, so that's really already been possible in terms of what's in ROR. And this is just an example of a screenshot of Dryad's interface where you can put both the affiliation of the researcher, but also for the funder. So they've integrated that funder using ROR system. Other systems have done this, like Zenodo, and more are starting to do so. So watch that for that blog post about some of the early adopters. And just to give us a shout out to the organizations behind ROR, so California Digital Library, Crossref, DataCite are all key players of that organization. And then there's lots of ways that you can participate more in ROR. So the documentation, they have many different webinars and events, like monthly community calls, or I think bi-monthly, and certainly can get more involved. So Amanda, email is here, amanda@roar.org. So she's a great resource if you have questions about anything, and or the general email address or website is also good too. So the next identifier system I want to talk a little bit about, just a few slides, is RAIDs. There's been more of an uptake in Australia because they started in Australia, and they do have actually an ISO standard affiliated with RAIDs. So these are research activity identifiers to be associated to projects. They have a metadata schema which gives some basics about that project, like what's the title, what's the description, who's the PIs. But most of the metadata is really relationships to other entities that are associated to the project, like data sets, the funders, the grant IDs, the journal publications. So it's just another way to relate a project with all of its outputs. And then now what's happening is that DataCite has announced just recently in March a similar effort to what happened with IGSN. It's a little bit different, but a similar effort to have the resolution services with DataCite and to enable the RAID identifiers to be searchable or queryable within the PID graph. So that's really exciting. And even though Australia is, of course, the early adopter, being the inventor of it, it's now being adopted throughout the European Open Science Cloud and other initiatives like Open Science Assessment Framework. So this adoption is growing. And I have a link here to one of the PID Fest presentations about this work going on to the integration with DataCite. So here is from that presentation at PID Fest, they have this slide that showed what a record might look like. Now this is all made up information, but a fictitious project, but so you can kind of see like the kind of metadata that would be contained within a record. So it's just a really small information about the project itself, but most of it is about those linkages to those other resolvable persistent identifiers. So the people, the grant ID, the data sets, journal publications and samples, and instruments, and all of these other important things. So at this point, we have maybe a little bit of opportunity for some questions before we do some breakout groups. So I don't know if there's anyone online or in the room, but if you're in the room, Cameron has a microphone. And if you have a question. Okay. Is there any online questions? Okay.
I don't see any.
Hi, Ian Vega from USCPA. A lot of us are talking in the federal space about PIDs for projects, and we have been talking about looking at rates, but is there like a, and I haven't researched it enough, is there a specific definition for a project and what that is?
You know what, like when okay, so I'm not a RAID spokesperson, so I'll just say what I kind of gleaned from what I've learned. So part of what they describe themselves as what they're not. So, you know, they say, oh, they're not, you know, they're not a grant ID. Like they allow for projects, you know, because there are grant IDs and there are these other kinds of identifiers, but they keep project IDs sort of separate because projects can exist without funding, they can have different funding over time, and, you know, things can evolve. And so they wanted an entity that can remain stable or its own, you know, its own thing apart from the funding and apart from some of these other identifiers that are out there. So that's my interpretation of it, but I don't know if someone knows something more than I know. But were you raising your hand, Natalie, or? Oh, okay. Nick, did you have anything?
No, nothing really to add there.
Hopefully that was enough, but yeah. Okay, there's another question.
Hi, I'm Charlie Burris. I work for NCI and NOAA. And I just had a question. You mentioned metadata a few times on the slides, so I was just curious if you could elaborate a little bit more about the metadata that you deal with, like formats and standards.
Okay, so I mean, I can speak a little, but then maybe Natalie and Nick can also speak a little. So, I mean, of course, with every schema, they have the schema with the metadata fields and recommended vocabularies or required vocabulary. So, my experience, you know, came from prior to World Data System, where I was working with Ocean Networks Canada, implementing these identifiers and applying metadata to the fields. And there's the required ones, but there's also the not required elements that, you know, you should really try and complete. And I think what's really, what I'd like to talk about the discussion more is the relationship piece, because there's the relationship metadata fields in all these schemas where you can relate the main entity that you're having the digital object identifier for, and then you have what it relates to. So if it's a data set, you say, okay, this journal used this data, or this data set came from this physical sample, or whatever. So those relationships are so important metadata. But then other really important metadata is like the licensing, especially now when we're talking about AI algorithms and, you know, wanting to make that machine actionable for the usage in these applications and have them be able to judge whether they can use that data. So that's a required element in at least DataCite. But did you want to say?
Is that using JSON or?
Oh, so it's JSON or XML for most of the scheme, most of the identifier systems, but maybe not all. But did you want to say something about the metadata?
You can also
I
add
don't know if it's
custom
going to be
metadata.
relevant to your question specifically, the technical side of it, but in terms of CSAR metadata that users are providing, we have very few required metadata fields right now, and so that's always an ongoing topic of discussion because obviously if you don't have certain minimum metadata, then it's not useful to the users. And the user experience research that I've been doing does show, right, that like there's potentially some other ones that maybe we could consider requiring. We include things, of course, like latitude, longitude, description, we have a comment, and the fields are designed to be fairly broad and flexible because we serve so many different disciplines. We have some that are a little bit more drilling core specific as well. But yeah, it'll be interesting to have conversations with people about minimum metadata requirements, I think.
Yeah, one thing I'll point out for this community especially is in DataCite, there's location metadata allows for latitude and longitude, but actually not altitude or depth right now. So, I mean, while that might exist in your data set or some other metadata format that you're using, the DataCite, for example, doesn't actually have that ability. So there's room for improvements in these schemas. So that would be probably one that would help this community is to introduce, you know, the vertical metadata piece. But so there might be things that we can do to ask them to improve in future, you know, schema updates. So that can be an option too. Nick, do you have anything to add to that one?
I was just going to say that there are ways
Oh,
of,
I can't hear you.
of
I don't know.
slip. Can you hear me?
Did we turn off that?
Oh, probably from
Oh,
this.
yeah, sorry. Nick, go ahead. We had you muted, or we had you.
Yeah,
no.
because
Yep.
of before. So I was just going to say that there are ways of putting in custom metadata into the data site, and we at our repository have used that sort of as a pathway of communicating with other systems where they want to use DataCite to, you know, understand all of our contributions, and we would add a few flags or other ways. So you can actually use DataCite with custom ones that they haven't added. But it's better if it's standardized. You know, if it's one that a lot of people are using, it's much better to have it standardized. Also, the required fields. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time, and it's always a trade-off between making your data useful for, you know, more useful for people that are using it. It's better to have more metadata, but the more you have, the less people are going to participate in, you know, uploading data and bringing it to you. It's a lot more work for people. So it's always sort of a trade-off there.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before we launch into breakouts? Okay, so what we're planning to do for the breakouts is have 3 breakouts. One is online for those, so all those people that are online, you just stay where you are, and Nick will work with you on looking at the DataCite implementation type of topic. Then in the room here, Natalie and I will be 2 of the different breakouts. Natalie will focus more on the there's a typo here, sorry, but IGSN, not IGNS, anyways. Natalie will focus on that topic, and then I'll focus maybe more on looking at that persistent identifier interconnectedness. What can we do more to ensure that we're actually linking our research data objects with their metadata? So, I mean, and also, I mean, I'm open to other topics too in the discussion. So maybe Natalie can be on that half of the room. I'll be on this half of the room. And then we'll come back about 5 to 10 minutes before the session ends to kind of report out briefly and just close out. So I think that's good. So I'm going to mute you
Perfect.
online for us.
All right. Hello, everybody. I mean, this is sort of an open discussion. I'm happy to talk about any kind of issues that people want to, or, you know, focus on DataCite implementation. So there's only a few of us here, so we can talk about other things also. Kirsten?
What? Hey, Nick. This is Steve Formell. It looks like our video is disabled, which I understand, but just so
Oh,
you know,
let's see.
that's why you're by yourself.
Okay,
So, if you want
I'll
to turn
see
it
if I
off or leave
can,
it on, yeah,
I'll look and see if I can change that, but if not,
I
we'll
will
just,
re-enable it for the next few minutes since I'm watching closely and the waiting room is on. So.
okay,
cool,
great.
thank you. So, I gotta do that. There we go.
There we go. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Let me do some blurring, do a little backlight off. All right, here I come. Gonna make myself look pretty. There we go.
Perfect.
Cool. So I have a thought, but it's a bit of a tangent. So if anybody else has like sort of focused questions or thoughts to lead the discussion, I would like to defer to them.
All right, well, we'll take
Okay,
a tangent.
Tangent it is then. Okay, so I work for the U.S. Geological Survey, and an interesting thing that with regards to PIDs for people, so the orchids especially, is that I've been told we can strongly recommend that USGS employees use them, but we can't mandate it because it's this private organization that's creating this thing, and so we can't say people have to use them. I've not been deeply involved in that conversation, but I'm curious if that type of challenge has been encountered with any of these other PIDs, where the community wants to use it, but it can't be mandated as a part of like a federal process.
I'm mostly on the the NSF side of things, and they tend to not mandate anything, but there tends to be strong norms. So, yeah, we don't have the same. I mean, we have in our data repository, we mandate everybody have an ORCID to upload data into our repository. So, I guess, we don't deal with that issue, and I haven't had any situations come up where people are like, no, I don't want to get an ORCID. Can we do it some other way? Originally, we just had username and password. But now there's more like issues with like losing your password, like, data hacking and all that sort of stuff. Having ORCID do all of that authentication and various, other legal issues around that seems easier for us. So we just, have set with that, and we haven't had issues with it. I don't know if Kirsten, do you guys use the ORCIDs? Require them or not?
We use them specifically in the EarthChem library.
Do you use that for your authentication? Can people
Yeah,
contribute data without ORCIDs?
They can, yes.
They can, okay.
But we've used the login. I mean, when we used to have a homemade system
Right.
called GeoPass for authentication, and we have moved to ORCID authentication, which is much easier. But yeah, if possible, we strongly encourage to use ORCIDs for identification. But I think only for the first author, and I see that Sapes is on. Sapes is the data curator for both CSAR and the EarthChem library. Can you confirm, Sapes, that it's only first author, or is it all authors?
It's basically the contributing author. So the one contributing to the system has to have an ORCID to log in.
Yeah, that's the same with ours. We don't require ORCIDs for the other authors. We actually, unlike most data repositories, we actually pull down all of our information from the paper metadata, which gives us some trouble with journals because they want to have the data published before the paper in general. So we're still in the old way we've been doing it for a long time, where we wait for the paper to get published.
Do you know that there is that effort going on led by Danny Kincaid on repo to pub? that specifically tries to address these issues of workflows between repositories and publishers with the manuscript handling of
Yeah, yeah,
what comes
I should
first,
join
what
that discussion, yeah. But I'm aware of that, but there's a lot of things.
Yep, as always.
So one of the reasons I was asking is because it's an interesting conundrum that, like, if you can get the federal agencies to buy into something, then that's a huge like push towards science generally accepting it, because all the money and the
Yep.
numbers of scientists that are using that convention. And so I've already encountered in my, with this inconsistent implementation of ORCIDs, it makes it difficult, for example, to, to demonstrate linkages, summary statistics of, oh, these people or this team or whatever contributed to these resulting products or data use or whatever. And so I'm wondering if the same thing is going to happen with the RORs, the RORs, that if like I know the USGS library took the trouble to mint RORs for I think every sort of granule of USGS they could. But if people aren't using them, then it's like, okay, well, it doesn't really help. And I was hoping somebody would say, oh, here's how you get your agency to mandate it. I was hoping somebody would have a silver bullet to say, this is how we're going to use it. But it sounds like y'all are in a bit of the same boat.
I think you really need to have somebody who influences policy at organizations. I've been really surprised last year when NASA actually in fall 22, they released this data and information policy called SPD 41A that basically lays out what everybody in NASA and funded by NASA has to do with their data. And each one of the divisions within NASA, Earth Sciences, Planetary Sciences, and so on, needed to put together their supplement to the policy. And the planetary data system put in that samples should be registered with IGSN through CISA. And, that is a major way to point people to say, the policy is this. Are you going to comply with your agency's policy? Right. So it really depends on who makes policies within the agency, and who you can contact and say this really needs to happen this way, and so on, and how responsive they are.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess
I think the USGS is specifically difficult because it's so fragmented in many procedures. I've seen NOAA. I'm on this data archiving committee at NOAA, and they talk about agency-wide policies for data that are very rigorously implemented. It's quite different.
Yeah, I believe the NSF is 2025. They're sort of solicited. They're going to come out with a set of new data retention and data set archiving policies, and we'll see what those are going to be. But they're going to be stricter about having your data in when you do your reports and that sort of thing. But I don't know how detailed it'll be at that level.
I mean, to me, this is a meeting of the CDF, but obviously we don't have a big community here in the in the breakout room.
Yeah.
One topic that we've discussed in the past in the CDF very early on, after founding, must have been like 2015, 16, was actually creating or converging across all the different data facilities that are part of the CDF on common practices and, recommended best practices for how to use persistent identifiers. And this has to do with, granularity of assigning those identifiers with what entities. I mean, obviously the word has changed over those eight or 9 years a lot, but I think that, having a discussion in the CDF on how we could jointly recommend certain, procedures would be really beneficial.
That is interesting. That would be a good topic.
And I mean, for example, I'm not sure if you're doing that already, but, between the repositories in Germany at the Geoforschungszentrum and so on, we're incorporating the persistent identifiers like the IGSN into the metadata of the dataset DOIs, right? In order to create the linkages on a persistent basis between samples and data and so on. I'm not sure how many data facilities in the CDF are really, following such a process, such a structure, and creating some awareness, maybe or at least have a dialogue about it and see how people are.
I mean, a good jumping off point is just what's required by DataCite, and then we can add on to that other things that we think are important.
I mean, they don't put up requirements in that respect, and unfortunately, we have at CISA, we've been, or more maybe for the IGSN, been fighting for incorporation of these related identifiers beyond DOI to DOI into efforts like Scholix, where you basically there's a central place where linkages between persistent identifiers exist, and you can generate statistics, right? Like you have data citation related, publication citation based on DOIs. But if they would include other identifiers like IGSNs, we could have ways to say, oh, all these papers have data for a given sample, or these publications relate to a given proposal through a rate and so on. So you could work much more with a richer network of persistent identifiers. That hasn't really happened so far. So
like, is that Scholix, is that a part of Crossref, or is that Crossref is a different one that does a similar thing?
I don't know where Scholix stands now. It was an effort that came out of a working group in RDA on data publication.
Okay.
And was created in conjunction with DataCite, harvesting basically information from different registration agents. This was way back also around 2016. Martin Fenner, who initially was running DataCite, was part of that group. And it's very Europe focused.
Yeah. So I was just thinking like Crossref, right, is where all the papers go.
Right. It's an extension to Crossref, but I think that Scholix wanted to be open, and
right.
Crossref went to build their data citation index that required subscription.
Right.
So I'm curious what will come out of in room 2, building PID interconnectedness, because that really pertains to that topic.
For sure. No microphone in the room for us to go.
Yeah, unfortunately. That's sad,
That's okay. It's in person. They get to have their in-person talk.
Megan, this is a hybrid meeting, more interaction.
We need to let them talk in person. That's fine. We couldn't get there. Although I guess, man, lots of people had troubles with the damn airline with that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really funny. I was in a meeting earlier today where we were saying it's become more difficult to travel in summer than in winter. It used to be in the winter times with snowfall, and now it's the summer times with thunderstorms that don't allow you to take off on land. You know,
Yeah, maybe it's
a
safety creep. Who knows exactly? All right. Well,
when
I
was
have another.
everybody to be back?
at like 10 minutes before, so about 12 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So did you have another
I did,
question
yeah.
or comment?
Yeah, so again, I'm not sure if I'm really on point of what our breakout is supposed to be about here, but
I think we're just talking about whatever at this point.
cool. Okay. So I sort of, I'm here more out of curiosity than like deep knowledge about DataCite and how it works. But so for example, I work with two international biodiversity initiatives, GBIF and OBIS. And
Okay.
and OBIS does not mint DOIs for their data sets, and GBIF does. And we're working towards changing that. But I might be oversimplifying it here, but from my understanding, one of the reasons is because, DOIs cost money. And so OBIS has to be careful about, what they do with their budget. And thus far, not just purchasing the DOIs, but the personnel to manage the DOIs has been something they've been, reluctant to go all in on. And so I'm curious, like, I'm looking at the fee structures for DataCite, and it's not crazy, but it is substantial, especially for perhaps developing countries. So how do we handle, persistent identifiers that do require real people and management and resources? How do we require that, or how do we broaden their use, but also bring along people who maybe can't afford to supply the resources to do so?
I think this was something that Natalie had in the talk about IGSN earlier, that, there are ways to reduce costs by forming consortia, for example. So while normally when you are a direct member of DataCite, you have to pay $2,200 now dollars per year, plus a $550 institute or organizational fee. If you form a consortium, the consortium lead pays the bigger bucks, but every member of the consortium just pays $500.
I see.
That reduces costs enormously. And so, that's why CSAR has started this process of becoming a consortium lead, so that we can offer organizations who have otherwise no way to become a DataCite member a far reduced fee for what they need. We have in CSAR, we've registered an average of about 150 to 180,000 IGSNs per year, which is, this has been a discussion with DataCite for quite a while. When you register DOIs, you don't have 100,000 or 200,000 data sets per year. Very few have that. But with samples, that's not uncommon. With the British Geological Survey came to us and wants to register 1 million samples from their collection.
Mm-hmm.
That is, you can't compare samples and data sets. And so we've been making that argument to DataCite, but so far they are pretty adamant. But for us, it's, stepping from up to 250,000, which is tier 4 in the DataCite membership, to tier 5, which is up to 1 million DOIs per year, is a difference of $5,000. And that is not, it's dramatic, I think, for, countries that don't have that money. But, we're trying to find business models to absorb that fee. It's not so bad.
Another thing, Stephen, that like for a long time we were under the University of California Library, and they they allow their groups and people at the university to they basically subsidize it. So there's a lot of, I mean, you can look around and maybe, I mean, I don't know if the USGS has some kind of, upper data site license that they're not talking about that you might be able, like people might be able to lock into. So I don't know if this database that you are talking about is under some umbrella organization.
Well, so they're under UNESCO, and I think the solution is just going to be that they join together with
Excuse
GBIF, which is sort of a larger but very similar organization, to not just realize the efficiency of minting them, but also managing them.
Yeah.
Having a sort of a joint team.
Yeah,
But
the management actually is, I mean, that's where, developing nations would have an advantage where they're like in the West, having a developer maintain that's a lot more than the fee to DataCite, probably.
right. Yeah, that makes sense.
If you're actually paying for that, I mean, a lot of times that's sort of hidden in grants and overhead and various other things, but
Yeah.
developing the system to begin with, is depends on how your data repository is set up. It's not very complicated, but if you need to make new internal structures to get all the data that you want to put in there, then that can be quite extensive.
Yeah.
If there's just a data object that has everything already, then you can just do a post to DataCite and it's pretty simple. But if you need to internally change your UI or your UX to gather that metadata, then it becomes expensive. All right, well, where are you, Kirsten, at the moment?
I'm in the office at Lamont,
Lamont.
but I leave in 2 days for the Meteoritical Society in Brussels, and so it was
Yeah, didn't want to be
much
down
travel.
there. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, well, we have a few more minutes before we should head back. I'm not sure what heading back means exactly. I guess Megan can, or somebody can
Staying.
switch us back
Wait.
over.
I think we're still in the main room, as far as I understand
Oh
it.
yeah, that's right.
think
They just
so.
turned
Nobody
down the
else.
volume.
Hopefully
They
they'll just
turned down the
unmute.
volume. All right, so we'll hang out.
We're just gonna be hanging out.
Most of the people left. They didn't have pressing needs.
Yeah, there are. Oh, one is Megan, the other one is somebody else from ESIP. I just have 2 ESIP logos here on my screen.
Yeah, Shenyu Jiao is our CDF ESIP
Oh, I see.
fellow. So she's been helping us along the way this year. So that's been nice.
Hmm.
Well, I'm in Colorado at the moment. Lots of
You
smoke.
are.
Lots of smoke here in the West right now. Like last year, it wasn't too
Again?
bad, but
Yeah, the last year was so bad here on the East Coast because
yeah,
of Canada, right?
kept up high last year. We didn't get much.
Here
But
it's just humidity,
well, that's every year.
sticky, blah, blah.
Yeah. What part of Colorado are you on, Nick?
I'm in Carbondale, Colorado, which is west of Aspen,
Ooh.
about 40 miles or so.
Yeah, it sounds nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice to get back. As I'm mostly a geologist, it's nice to get back to the mountains. I was in the Bay Area for a long time, which is beautiful, but getting to the mountains was arduous on weekends, that's for sure. So, but nowhere's inexpensive these days. I think the Mountain West is filled up. Most of the towns are now pretty expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, everything that's nice and like
especially with all the remote work now, which I'm doing myself, like that gives a lot of flexibility for people with high incomes to live where they want. And so, um,
I'm curious, I mean, are you actually employed at the University of California still,
no,
or Oregon?
actually, that's one of the reasons why I left there was now I'm just consulting so I can be more flexible on where I can live. So yeah, I was sort of required to be in California, taking state tax fund money and not living in the state is not encouraged, I guess.
Yeah, I'm having issues with Columbia University and remote staff. That's
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Is it just out of state or is it just they want them in the office?
No, it's out of state. It's the
Yeah.
issue that universities have in, managing taxes to other states.
Oh, taxes are also sort of a
They
pain.
need specific arrangements, and so Columbia allows basically the adjacent states of New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. But everything beyond that is not
Not allowed yet.
not allowed yet unless you have very specific, like medical reasons or family problems. And
Yeah.
I've been writing letters to the provost and similar high-level management at the university to.
Do you think it's just like administration overhead they don't want to deal with because
It's money overhead. It does require more work, more staff to manage, out of state employees or,
Yeah.
and, I've been suggesting solutions in, I don't know how it's in other places, but I figure it's similar that if you have off-campus, off-site work happening, you have a lower ICR, lower overhead rate. And I would be happy to have a lower overhead rate and pay part of the saved money back to the university to support, remote work.
Right.
The states, but so far, yeah. I mean, they're listening now, at least since we have a new president and a new provost, but it's.
Yeah, COVID pushed through a lot of changes for that, but not everything.
No, I mean, there's administrations are hard to move.
A lot of it is just old software systems that they can't replace and can't change.
Well, I think some
They've got a pull down and it
recently.
has 3 states and they can't change the pull down. So they're just like, we can't do it.
That causes crashes.
Yeah, it causes crashes. Blue screens all over the country.
Yeah, right. That was something. Okay. I think we should be seeing people come back pretty soon.
Pretty soon. Yeah, my world is pretty Mac based, so we didn't have
too much,
much stuff, much problems.
I mean, Columbia University had a lot of their financial systems and, it's SAP. I think that all runs Windows.
Yeah.
Yes, that was pretty bad. I was glad I wasn't in the airport anyway. Boy, that must have been something.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't the FAA that went down, but just the airline systems.
Yeah, I mean, it was when,
I
just couldn't believe what was going on there because a company like this big security enterprise, what was it, CrowdStrike or Cloud, whatever. I mean, they should have better procedures in place to do updates.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a security
and this happens to you,
company and you create this chaos, you basically should go bankrupt and everybody should stop using them.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people are, but
what are the alternatives? Are there companies that can?
There's a few other ones. I mean, I know people are migrating, so.
Yeah, they have to. I mean, it's Totally.
They're not, I mean, if it's some other system that goes down, that's fine. But if it's actually your security system that screws that up,
That's so bad,
yeah.
and also, I mean, besides testing properly, you need different types of procedures. They release the new version to everybody at the same
Right. Usually you
rather
do
than
like, yeah, you do a limited rollout.
rollouts and stuff like that, it's, I mean, even we as these little data facilities know better. It's like, no, really crazy. Hey, where are these people?
Well,
We just ring the bell.
they're having great discussions
I
in
think so.
person.
It looks that way, yeah.
Well, we said 5 minutes, 10 to 5 to 10 minutes. So
Okay. We
we'll give
forgive
them a few more. I mean, what our summary, our discussion was funding for DataCite,
Yeah, how you can,
participation.
I mean, to me, it's also really that collaboration in some way can reduce costs of this.
Right.
And, that is to me always a central message when it comes to CDF, that maybe, we can do better in sharing.
Yeah, we could at least get us like survey and see what
Yeah.
people are paying and what they're part of. And if there would be an interest in doing that, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think the part of what I was trying to get at, or just thinking about, is that, that social, it doesn't matter how perfect the PID is, there's still going to be social hurdles to implementation.
Yep.
Whether they're, economics or bureaucracy or, some other type of governance. And those are sort of interesting questions in and of themselves. Like I was going back to thinking about, like, well, how come the government isn't, maybe using personal identifiers, but they're using DOIs? And I was like, well, probably at some point somebody, did sort of mandate it without specifically saying DOI. They said, hey, this is the thing to do. By the way, your only option.
Dropped out for me.
Oops. Yeah. Frozen. Somehow. Something happened.
That's about real life in-person conferences have other problems like trying to get everybody fed, but at least the latency and computer stuff can be more minimal.
Yeah.
You have to fly there though. That's a lot of work.
Yes. Yeah, they really seem to have an awesome time there.
Yeah, I had some other prior commitments, so I couldn't make it down there. It's a bit of a journey too. A lot of connections to get.
Yeah, exactly. It's that was for me too. I
If it
think
had been in Charlotte, that would have been a little easier.
that would have been so much easier. Will we be regrouping soon? Well,
I hope so.
It's me trying to get somebody's attention in the room.
yeah, 4 minutes left. I think that grouping won't do much anymore.
I don't really have any. I mean, I can send an email or something, but that's not going to do much.
Yeah, I'm sure that maybe the meeting notes have filled up with ideas, hopefully, to follow up on.
All right. Yeah, we can put ours in there.
Okay, well then
All right.
I'm
I'll
just,
hang on here if you want to go, Kirsten.
I think that may be at this point.
That's fine.
I don't think that in 3 minutes there's going to be a lot that will happen.
Well, thanks for those slides, and
Yeah, that was
hope you guys are still chugging along there at AIDA.
definitely
Yeah,
kind of exploding, but
yeah. I mean, that's the thing about your Caesar too. If you're like, if people are using it, maybe they need to kick in
that's the
a
thing,
little money, right?
Yeah, but
Okay, we're just
we were
regrouping here
about
now
to
for the
leave
closing.
you all.
So Natalie and Nick, are you around?
I'm here. You have to turn up the.
Oh, I can't hear you, so what's going on here? Hold on here.
Yeah, you have to turn it up.
Okay, Nick?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's great. We had a good discussion here, at least in my group.
Yeah, we ours was limited. We didn't have too many people, but we had some good talks about sort of how to get the people to use DataCite and metadata.
Right, and sorry, just 1 second, Nick. In the room, if we could just be quiet so we can hear what they were talking about online in brief, and also then we'll do a quick report from our groups. But Nick, yeah, go ahead.
So our main discussion was on sort of the funding for DataCite and how to possibly have people join together to create economies of scale, and also just how to, especially in some larger federal agencies, get how fast to try to implement and get these ideas through the system to where people are willing and able and want to use these identifiers when they're submitting their data or archiving their data.
Okay, thank you. And Natalie, do you want to report out briefly from your group?
Yeah, so we had a really interesting conversation that focused on needs, domain-specific needs, how to better support those, both in terms of how do we build consensus within certain domains on the types of metadata templates that could be built. We also talked about some of the linkages that may or may not exist right now for having these PIDs be resolving within journals and publications, and then carried out through data sets. And so I highlighted the work of the ESIP Physical Samples Curation Cluster, which I encourage you all to check out online on ESIP's website under the collaboration areas. We just submitted an output that's in review right now. That's been 3.5 years coming, and that includes a lot of guidance on sample PID registration and then what to do with those PIDs in data sets. And we conclude that paper. I'll make sure that the preprint link is in the notes for this session. We conclude by calling out some of the technical challenges and stakeholders involved to make action forward progress on those.
That's great. And then our group was talking about a lot of the other PID systems and, had a few different conversations, but in terms of instruments, we kind of worked through a few useful use cases where we think that instrument PIDs would be helpful, but also there'd be a challenge for repositories to know, is there a persistent identifier for that instrument, or get that information from the depositor, or get the sufficient metadata to do the minting themselves. So there's some workflow challenges, similar problems maybe with the grant. I know we didn't really talk about the grant IDs in the presentation, but when we started talking about the funder PIDs, we talked a little bit about the grant and award PIDs that are going to be required in the near term following the White House Nelson memo type of work. And without the award persistent identifiers existing necessarily by those granting agencies, it makes it difficult. So everyone is still trying to sort that out in full, but there's been progress certainly, especially with the Department of Energy. And then we talked a little bit about, we got into a little bit about vocabularies as well, like with relation to instruments. And so this is something to follow up and look at what is the guidance right now for the instrument types or vocabularies that with the DataCite metadata, since there are existing vocabularies already, but not sure if those are being incorporated or recommended. So I know I didn't capture everything because we went on a winding road,
Yeah,
but
that's fine.
I think that was good. So, thank you. I know we're slightly, just a couple more minutes over time, but we do have this Council for Data Facilities meeting every Wednesday or every first Wednesday of the month. If you want to join us, there's a link to that information. And maybe we'll carry on some of these conversations at those meetings.